going to call to order this regularly scheduled board meeting today on September 10th. Sorry that we're a few minutes late. We will now take our roll call.
Student Board Member Mackenzie Shepherd.
Here.
Sorry. Student Board Member Ayush is absent tonight. Trustee Mahoney.
Here.
Trustee Khan.
Here.
Trustee Boyd.
Here.
Vice President Hopwood.
Here.
President Davidson.
Here. Okay. We will now do the reading of the AUSD mission and vision statement and meeting norms.
The mission of Albany Unified School District is to provide excellent public education that empowers all to achieve their fullest potential as productive citizens. AUSD is committed to creating comprehensive learning opportunities in a safe, supportive, and collaborative environment, addressing the individual needs of each student. Meeting norms. Maintain a focus on what is best for our students, ensure a safe environment for all views to be expressed, treating each other, staff, and the public respectfully, endeavor to find common solutions to issues through collaboration without sacrificing one's beliefs in what is best for students, make a commitment to effective deliberation, each one listening with an open mind while others are allowed to express their own points of view, even if one disagrees.
Thank you so much for taking all that on. We will now recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand and join if you would like to. Okay. There was no action taken in closed session, so we will move on to our approval of the agenda. If anyone has any questions or a motion.
I'll move to approve the agenda.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so our agenda passes, and we will move on to our spotlight on Marin Elementary School.
Yes, I was told not to steal anyone's thunder, so I'm not going to tell you what it's about, but I am going to introduce our principal of Marin, Melissa Pohl, and our librarian, Camille Snyder, and they're going to talk to you about their spotlight, or what they're spotlighting. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Evans. Thank you, Board, for having us tonight. It's really great to be here. I'm just going to turn it over to the amazing Camille Snyder, our teacher librarian, to tell you a little bit about the fun things that are going on at the Marin Library.
Good evening, everybody. I would like to start tonight's presentation by talking about what I often do with my own students in the library, which is to talk about how books are either a window or a mirror. And so the window offers us a glimpse into other concepts and worlds and people's lives. And sometimes books can be a mirror where you get to see yourself reflected in it. And in our library, I think it's critical that kids get to have both mirror and window books. And you'll see a little bit of that today in the presentation. And as you watch and you're looking at some of the books that the kids are reading, I would ask you to ask yourself whether or not you're looking into a window or into a mirror. Hello, my name is Camille Snyder. I am Marin Elementary School's teacher librarian. This is the Spotlight on Marin Elementary School, and today I'm going to be talking to you about a library program called Mystery Bags. So as a teacher librarian, I have several things that I want. One is to get books into the hands of kids. That's probably my most important goal. Another is to reinforce our social, emotional, and social justice competencies. These are the ones that our school district adopted a few years ago. And all the latest research is saying that in order for kids to comprehend the new text that they're reading, they really have to have strong background information about that topic. So my third want is to help kids build that background information. But, you know, sometimes the kids just like to focus on, you know, checking out the same books over and over again. There's only so many Diary of a Wimpy Kids that will help build background and address social, emotional, and social justice competency. So we have those books in the library. How do I get our kids to check them out? This is the conundrum for me. So I came up with a program called Mystery Bags. And the way this works is that I put 2 books in the same mystery bag together. It gets locked up. I have a key for it. And the kids actually check out the bag not knowing what's inside. So that's mystery number 1. Mystery number 2 is to read the books and see if they can figure out why they are in the same bag together, why I put that in the same bag. Here are a sample of 2 books that I put in the same bag together. This is Wangari's Trees of Peace. It is a narrative nonfiction. It's a true story of Wangari Maathai, who is a well-known environmental figure. And this is a fiction book called Just the Dream. And let's listen to what the kids have to say about why they were put in the same bag together.
Both come back. Well, when she comes back and he goes into the future, she sees that all the trees were cut down because she used to live under like a blanket of forest trees. Mm-hmm. And when she came back from her college, all the trees were cut down and women were having to work cutting down trees. And when the boy went into the future, he saw that there was a bunch of litter, violence, trash. He saw that it wasn't as peaceful. So I think you put those books in the same bag together because they both want to make the world a better place, and Just a Dream, the boy wants to clean up the trash and make a bunch of stuff. And then in Wangari's Trees of Peace, she wants the people to stop cutting down trees and gets arrested for doing so. They were in the same bag because they're both talking about how trees make the world have a better climate. I think it's knowledge of societal inequalities.
And in kid language, that means that you're knowing what is fair, right? So tell us why you picked that it teaches you to know what's fair.
Because if something you know it's right, and it will make maybe not the whole world, but make little parts of the world better. And then other people say it's not a good idea, but you literally know that it's going to help. Then if you do it, then the other people might realize that it's a good thing.
Gives us hope for the future, doesn't it? All right, so in another bag, we have these 2 also narrative nonfiction books. These both take place in California within our recent history.
Well, civil rights for schools, mm-hmm. because they were both about them going to Mexican schools, mm-hmm. instead of going with everyone in one school. I think include others, and I know it's fair.
In another bag, we had another narrative nonfiction book. This is And Tango Manx 3, and then a fiction book, A Tale of Two Daddies.
I think that both the books, the kids in the story, have 2 dads.
Wonderful.
I think they went in the same bag together because they were both about having 2 daddies, and it's okay to be different.
Do you think that these books, when you read them, do you think that it teaches you a little bit more about knowing yourself, or including others, or knowing what's fair, or caring about others, or being a good friend, making good decisions?
I know what is fair.
Yeah, and can you explain what you mean by knowing what is fair?
because in this book, Tango makes 3. Both the dads want a baby, but they can't give birth. But just because they have different genders, they can still have. To like care about others, like because they cared about like they wanted to care for their like a baby.
And last, we have 2 other narrative nonfiction books. Both of these are books also about the environment, specifically about the value of recycling.
Because there is lots of trash on the ground, and like
In both books.
yeah, and 2 girls use these like in this book they find a broken violin and they start to fix it, and then they start to fix lots of things, and then they create an orchestra. So she's like living in this town, and then like she finds a plastic bag, and then like she finds more and more plastic bags, and then the plastic bags start like people start littering them on the ground, and then so her sister teaches her to crochet the bags into like these pouch thingies.
Do you want to show us what that looks like inside one of the pictures? So there's all the plastic bags. Yeah. So those are made out of just like trash, basically. And the women have learned how to crochet them. Good. And do they sell those bags?
Yeah, they sell the women sell the bags in the market, and then like first people don't want to buy them, then one person buys them, then a lot of people buy them. Then they're not that poor, and they have less trash problems. I would choose the make good decisions.
Yeah. Would you point to that for us? Awesome. And so tell us why you picked that one.
Because they both make good decisions, not to just like throw away the trash.
Which one of these things do you think the book teaches you?
This one.
And which one is that?
Responsible decisions making.
And so why do you think it teaches you to make good decisions?
Because they make good decisions by like they're like helping, like they're like not like they're making good decisions, because if these goats, like there's goats in this book, like if they eat the plastic, they will die, and it won't be good if they die, because that's just fat.
So librarians love statistics, and I looked at the data. In the 3 weeks that I had this program running, you have to do it for a short amount of time or else it loses its luster. The bags were checked out 61 times, and the total number of books that I had were read 102 different times by students at the Marin Library. And I just want to take the opportunity to thank you. I feel so fortunate to work for a school district that hires teacher librarians, that values our libraries, because we do our best to provide a really strong educational program at our schools. Have a great night, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. We always love seeing what's happening at our school sites. And we're going to move on to our recognition now. The board recognizes and promotes awareness months and national days with proclamations that encourage the district to observe these occasions with appropriate events and instructional activities. Okay, so we had these as resolutions, and we're following what the city council does and having proclamations now, which means we don't need to vote on them anymore. So we're going to read them to honor them and make it known, and then we'll just move on to the second one. All right, and our first proclamation is in recognition of Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, Latine Heritage Month, September 15th to October 15th. Am I reading this one? Great. On it.
I'm sorry. I thought you were going to discuss like who was going to read them.
Yeah.
So if,
Okay.
I don't know if you wanted to do that or.
It's been a long week, and we had
It's
this
been a
whole
long week,
discussion,
yeah.
and then we were like, yes, this. Okay, so
Sorry, thank you.
what we want to do is we have two options that we had discussed. Option number one is that we just have board members rotate. So basically, whoever's in the agenda setting meeting will, before the meeting, will be one of the ones who reads these. Or we can kind of look through the proclamations of the year and say, hey, I'd like to sign up to read this one, or I'd like to sign up to read that one. And you'll kind of work a little bit just to make sure that it has current information, et cetera, in it. That'll, of course, be supported by the amazing Julie Shen and all of our other team. So if anyone has any kind of thoughts on which sounds better, jump in.
I'm fine with it being part of the agenda setting if everyone else is.
I feel like I shouldn't comment because I'm not going to be here. But since I was a part of I was the person who was saying, I've really liked having it be something that you in particular do. I don't want to just like say things behind closed doors and not say them in the open session. So I have really enjoyed having specific resolutions on particular subject matters that mean something special to me, and I've enjoyed being the person who voices XYZ thing, and so that is something that has resonated with me during my time on the board. But as I've said, I'm not going to be here, so I just wanted to offer that was what made me suggest that route.
I wonder if we basically just kind of go through and say, okay, it's going to be, whoever's in the agenda meeting, but if there's any that feel particularly strong for a board member that they say, hey, I actually would really like to do this one, and we can all be flexible on that and say, yeah, let's just shimmy around and switch them up. And we can, always move agenda setting meetings to coordinate with those, and or just know that that person's taking it on, and then we won't discuss it in the meeting. Does that feel okay? For tonight, I'm happy to read both of them. It's totally fine with me, unless anyone else feels like, I'm ready to read a proclamation. All right, I got it. I'm gonna do both. How exciting. Okay,
I can do special ed if you want.
awesome. All right. So this is our proclamation in recognition of Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, Latine Heritage Month, September 15th to October 15th. Whereas National Hispanic Heritage Month is observed from September 15th to October 15th by celebrating the histories, cultures, and contributions of Americans whose ancestors came from Spain, Mexico, the Caribbean, and Central and South America, and whereas the observation started in 1968 as Hispanic Heritage Week under President Lyndon Johnson and was expanded by President Ronald Reagan in 1988 to cover a 30-day period starting on September 15th and ending on October 15th. It was enacted into law on August 17, 1988, on the approval of Public Law 100-402. Whereas the day of September 15th is significant because it marks the anniversary of independence for multiple Latin American countries, including Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. In addition, Mexico and Chile celebrate their Independence Days on September 16th and September 18th, respectively, and Day of Races, or Dia de la Raza, which is on October 9th, falls within this 30-day period. And whereas the Albany Unified School District Board of Education, the board, recognizes the integral role and influence of Latino, Latinx people in the history, culture, language, and achievements of the United States, And whereas the diverse Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, Latine population is a mixture of our indigenous ancestors of the Americas with various combinations of Europeans, Africans, and Asians, and whereas the term Latinx and Latine acknowledges the diversity of our population with all its gender and sexual identities and is a reflection of our changing societal norms. And whereas Latino, Latinx students make up approximately 18% of the AUSD student population, 40% of California's public school student population, and is the largest ethnic group in the United States. Now, therefore, the Albany Unified School District Board of Education does hereby proclaim September 15th to October 15th, 2024 as Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, Latine Heritage Month, and aspires that this recognition series will spur meaningful actions throughout the district for a better present day and keep AUSD on the path for a more equitable future. District schools and teachers will commemorate this occasion with appropriate instructional materials and activities. Okay, we're going to move on.
I'm ready to read.
Passing it over.
Proclamation 2024-25-02. Recognizing October as Special Education Awareness Month. Whereas the Albany Unified School District Board of Education, the board, recognizes the integral role and influence of our students with disabilities and contributions of our special education staff and the rich history and achievements of individuals with disabilities, and recognizes that disability is part of human diversity and that discrimination and ableism limit opportunities of many people with disabilities. And whereas the Albany Unified School District, AUSD, serves approximately 560 students formally identified with disabilities, representing roughly 15% of the total student population. And whereas the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, including jobs, schools, transportation, and all public and private places that are open to the general public, and assures that people with disabilities have the same civil rights protections and opportunities as everyone else, similar to those provided to individuals on the basis of race, color, sex, national origin, age, and religion. And whereas Section 504 of the Federal Rehabilitation Act regulations requires a school district to provide non-discriminatory and equal access to education, and whereas the Individuals with Disabilities Act, IDEA, requires all public schools to address the needs eligible pupils with disabilities and develop individualized educational plans, IEPs, which provide a free and appropriate public education, FAPE, in their least restrictive and most inclusive educational settings. And whereas the reauthorization of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, in 2004, Congress stated that, quote, disability is a natural part of the human experience and in no way diminishes the rights of individuals to participate in or contribute to society. Improving educational results for children with disabilities is an essential element of our national policy of ensuring equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency for individuals with disabilities. And whereas the Fair Education Act, enacted January 1st, 2012, requires that California schools provide fair, accurate, inclusive, and respectful representations of people with, roll please, disabilities and people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender in history and social studies curriculum, and mandates schools to include the contributions of people with disabilities and members of the LGBTQIA+ community in the curriculum. And whereas despite the affirmative rights and appreciation for students with disabilities in our federal and state laws, students with disabilities suffer the worst academic and social and emotional outcomes in our district, especially among students of color and English language learners. And whereas as educational leaders, the board and AUSD recognize that evidence-based instructional methods, universal design for learning, inclusive practices, restorative justice practices, social and emotional learning, bullying prevention and intervention, mental health supports, and authentic family engagement are proven to substantially improve the educational and equitable outcomes of all students, including students with disabilities. Whereas the board and AUSD recognize that our students with disabilities are generally education students first, and the implementation of meaningful education of students with disabilities is the responsibility of all educators they interface with, that every educational, operational, and budget decision we make begins with and reflects the belief that students with disabilities have a right to and have the ability to learn alongside their non-disabled peers, and equitable and meaningful opportunities to learn and grow. And whereas the board and AUSD recognize that school climate refers to the norms, values, and expectations that support people to feel physically, socially, and emotionally safe and connected. To be their best, students must feel a sense of connectedness and belonging to their school community. Specifically, schools that are committed to promoting a variety of positive relationships with caring adults will have more connected and engaged students with disabilities. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the board and AUSD remain committed to working towards equitable outcomes for students with disabilities and support a vision of high expectations for all students, and a commitment to learning standards, interventions, and supports that are strong, clear, understood, and put into practice. And be it further resolved that the board and AUSD value and support diversity and inclusion and recognize both the legal right to and the reciprocal benefits of inclusive education. And be it further resolved that the board and AUSD remain committed to ensuring the implementation of and efficacy of a multi-tiered system of supports, MTSS, including an early identification and early intervention system to identify and document interventions for students whose performance and/or progress indicates that they are at risk for attendance, behavior, and/or course performance. And be it further resolved that the Albany Unified School District Board of Education does hereby proclaim the month of October as Special Education Awareness Month, recognizing and celebrating students with learning differences and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. Copies of this proclamation will be sent to the district administrators, teachers, staff, departments, and schools for appropriate distribution and implementation.
Thank you. Yeah, these are a lot. We used to.
Next time I'm picking the shorter one, just kidding.
Yeah, I don't think there is one. We used to rotate around, like sometimes we'd each read a paragraph, which we could also do and keep us all engaged. So that's another route we could go. And I just wanted to make note that we put the Special Education Awareness Month one on this meeting because we will not have another public meeting in September since we shifted our schedule. That's why we're putting this out there in advance this evening. Okay. Would you like to make a comment on that? All right, come on up.
Thank you. That was impressive. I'm glad I wasn't the one doing the reading. I'd like to thank the board for passing this resolution, and I'm going to assume that it was thanks to Director Brian Biggs, but if I'm not giving credit where credit is due, please correct me if I am wrong, that this was proposed and passed this time without prodding or pushing by the Albany Disability Squad, and that's refreshing. Thank you. The second point, and two of them were made in the proclamation, is about the implementation of multi-tiered system of supports and universal design for learning, which the board adopted back 2 or 3 years ago and has been in the process of implementing. And I think the public is overdue for an update on what the progress has been. We're well past beyond of what each of those two things are, and well into how we're doing in the implementation process right now. And the third one, which is not mentioned here, is one that the Albany Disability Squad has tried to work with both administration and with the Albany Teachers Association, the ATA, which in order to implement UDL and MTSS, and create the kind of environment in which students with disabilities and the staff that support them are able to thrive. It would be great if, as part of the negotiation, looking at you, Marina, that the special education teachers and staff are paid according to the extra expertise and extra work and extra administrative work they are responsible for. And the general education teachers who have students with disabilities in their classroom, because they have additional administrative work as part of that, that they are giving extra time to collaborate with special education staff and extra pay for doing that extra work. So, thank you.
Thank you. We will make note of those updates. I think everyone would like to hear those. Okay, we are going to move on to our student board member reports. Great.
At Albany High School, Club Rush was yesterday and was very successful. Students in all grades explored and enjoyed various school clubs. Tomorrow is back to school night at AHS from 7 to 9 p.m. And last Thursday, Albany High School JV volleyball beat St. Helena 24-14 at Cougar Field, a great way to represent the first home game of the season. Their next and last home game is this Thursday, September 12th, where they'll play Northgate at 6:30 at Cougar Field. At Albany Middle School, starting on September 16th through September 22nd, AMS Library is holding a fundraiser at Pegasus Books. Cornell's PTA is holding an ice cream social in the multipurpose room from 5 to 7 p.m. on Friday, September 20th. Ocean View will have tours on Tuesday, September 24th from 9:30 to 10 a.m. At Marin, the PTA meeting is on September 12th from 6:30 to 8 p.m. And at Albany Children's Center, the new preschool students have been gradually starting in the past couple of weeks. The student enrollment has been very successful. And their first PATT, Parent and Teachers Together meeting, will be on September 19th, starting at 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. via Zoom.
Awesome. Super thorough. Okay, we are going to move on right now to our public comment for matters not on the agenda. Seeing as there is no one in our virtual audience, does anyone in here want to make a comment? Okay. And we're going to move on to our approval of the consent calendar. I want to ask a question on an item, so anyone else has any?
I was just going to make, there was an amendment to one item, which is 10E.
Do you want to just make, what's,
So I already contacted Ms. Shen, and she has made the amendment, which was the on 10E, which was approving the overnight field trip for the cross-country team. It had said regular meeting of September 24th, and so she's changed it September 10th. So
great. And I just had a question on 10D, and this is the contract with AUSD and SPG Therapy and Education. I was asked just to check this contract that we're entering into. Is this a fully certified speech and language pathologist, or is this, is the person that we're contracting to bring in as qualified as who we would hire normally for this position?
They have a certification as a speech and language pathologist, yes.
Great. Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Other than that, I'm good. Anyone else?
I move to approve the consent calendar as is.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, we've moved on. We are now going to move on to our staff report, and our first staff report is our facilities update on our summer projects from 2024.
Hi, thank you, Superintendent, Board of Trustees, community, teachers, anyone watching. I'm really happy to be able to highlight some of the achievements of the Maintenance and Operation Department and of the district this past summer. I'm Scott Jaffe, the Director of Maintenance and Operations. I believe we have some pictures. Yes, thank you. We can go to slide 2, because before I jump into the report, I just wanted to take a moment to introduce my team, the district's team. stalling.
They're in their Halloween finest,
Stalling,
ghosts.
Yes. And I wanted to say this, and oh, wait, Kim says. Here we go. Okay. Next slide, please. All right. Thank you. I wanted to introduce the team because this is the first year that the maintenance and operation team is fully staffed since I began working here in 2022. And I feel really fortunate to have this team of hardworking, behind-the-scene professionals who are committed to continual improvement. It's these folks, along with the team of custodians, that go the extra mile every day to make sure our students have clean, safe, functioning facilities. Not pictured here is Aaliyah Wilkes, our maintenance and facilities coordinator, who has worked for the district for 9 years. She's responsible for all aspects of state and local compliance. That includes our vehicles, our elevators, fire alarm systems, backflow. She also helps with cost estimating and project scheduling, research parts and equipment, keeps our files in order, archives data and documents, and for me, she is the person who knows how things are supposed to be done and where things are and who to call. So I'm grateful for her. In this picture on the right is Sarn Saturn. He's worked for the district for 5 years, and he knows how to do most repairs and can figure things out. He's a good painter, plumber, and all-around technician, and loves learning new skills. If you know him, you know that he has a humble good nature and a willingness to do whatever it takes. On the other side is Hannibal Solis, our stationary engineer. He joined at the start of this year and has already made an impact. He's an expert at repairing and maintaining HVAC equipment and controls, and his skills extend to electrical, plumbing, and mechanical. And then in the middle is Christian Baravalli. He's the newest member of our team, and he hit the ground running. He's an incredibly hard worker, has a broad knowledge of carpentry, electrical, plumbing, fire controls, and is a great addition to the team. And I just wanted to take this moment to thank them for their commitment to our students. Next slide, please. So this summer, the biggest project, of course, was the Cornell HVAC project. That is where we installed new, for the first time, HVAC control units into all of the classrooms and offices at Cornell Elementary. These are electric heat pumps, and it was a huge disruption, as you can see from some of these pictures, and an unrealistically tight schedule, tight timeline. But everything has been installed and was functioning at the start of the school year. I want to express huge gratitude to Principal Floresca and the teachers for their patience and flexibility. The work was happening right up to the first bell, and classrooms were flipped upside down. This was, if you walked through this in the summer, you wouldn't have believed what we had to contend with. We sent an army of custodians to Cornell in early August to help prepare for the start of the school year, and they did a great job. However, the school did not get as deep a cleaning as usual, so the teachers were very understanding, and I want to thank them for that. Next slide, please. In June and July over the summer, we did a project renovating the floors at both high school and middle school gyms that had them closed for 4 weeks. This was taking it down to the bare wood, initiated by safety concerns over delaminating the old floor finish, which had several years built up, and this kind of renovation does need to happen on these floors about every 10 years. Here I want to thank Bill Tressler and the athletic department for adjusting their schedules to accommodate this work. The floors are beautiful, and we intend to keep them that way for a while. Next slide, please. We did some classroom painting this summer, much needed. We were able to fully paint 5 classrooms, and my intention is to schedule at least 5 to 8 classrooms every summer as we address some of the heaviest needs. Next slide, please. At Marin, we installed a climbing wall, which you can see the kids enjoying here. The parts and materials were provided by the PTA, with special thanks to Christina and Dan Freschel for organizing that and sharing their expertise on the climbing wall. Next, please. Also at Marin, we repaired and painted the wall at the corner of Marin and Curtis. This helped to save and highlight that wonderful mosaic that's on that corner. This work was deferred from the school reconstruction, but was necessary because of deep structural cracks in the wall, and so this will maintain that. Next, please. Also, at the middle school, we installed the second of two 12-foot by 8-foot murals in their atrium. This mural was created by the 6th grade art class, the entire 6th grade art class, and led by the art teacher, Natasha Lucci, and parent, Sweta Chwala. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. But that really rounds out. Now we have murals on over both stairways, really beautifies that atrium for the students. And next, we have the Albany Aquatic Center. This got a much-needed coat of exterior paint. The building had not been painted in 15 years, and due to the high humidity from the inside pool, the outside walls were showing a lot of cracking. There was a lot of rust on the metal members, so we did a full paint of the exterior with elastometric paint to prevent this problem in the future. That's paint that will help reduce the cracking over time. And here are some other projects we were able to complete. We resurfaced the roof at the high school MPR kitchen to prevent future leaks. In keeping with the environmental action plan, we replaced 3 gas water heaters with electric heat pump water heaters at Cornell and AMS kitchens and at ACC. This was through a PGE incentive and was at no cost to the district. And we are in the process now of continuing that with the water heaters at the high school gym for the locker rooms and at the aquatic center for their showers. So that should help reduce our carbon footprint. We also installed heat pumps at the district office, providing heating and cooling for the first time since the district moved into that office. Everyone's happy about that. We restriped the parking lot at the middle school, which was needed since removing the portable classrooms last summer. We restriped the playground at Ocean View and added an additional tetherball. We repaired the long-standing drainage problem at Ocean View Play Structure, and this goes back to when I started. We've been trying to get this fixed. A lot of finger pointing went on, but we finally got that fixed at no cost to the district. We built security fences at Cornell, their new 48-foot-long ball wall to prevent students from going behind the wall. At the middle school, we replaced and added new backpack racks. At Marin, we installed a changing table in room S12, as that became a special ed classroom. And we installed some temporary shade structures at the high school. Those are the highlights. We also took care of a lot of work orders. I just want to end by thanking the superintendent, the board of trustees, the executive team, and the school principals for really supporting these projects, which take money, time, and effort, and also can be disruptive. And it's their support, your all support, that helps us to continually improve our schools. Are there any questions?
I have a couple.
Sure.
Of course. So I just was wondering if there was an update on the ADA compatibility in the Cornell bathrooms as a result of the play structure approval.
Yeah, now that the HVAC project is wrapped up, we still have a few punch lists, but it's more or less wrapped up. We're going to now take proposals for that from contractors and try to get that scheduled. My goal is to get that scheduled during winter break.
Has there been any thought about, like, we have to take toilets away, what we're going to do to offset accessible toilets for students?
We have not had any conversations toward that end. I have personally tried to brainstorm some solutions for that. But at this time, I do not have an answer for that.
Just want to make sure that we're in compliance for actually accessible toilets for students, because I know it's a huge issue at many sites, but particularly at that site.
So if I may, we are absolutely in compliance based on when the building was built.
Great. I know we're going to do our best
We will do our best.
to make sure that all of our sites offer things that students really need. The other one is that site still would love a water bottle filling station and a new drinking fountain, because the one they have is.
That'll be part of those improvements.
Okay, great, wonderful. And finally, just because we highlighted such beautiful things on our schoolyards and talked about those, there is still a lot of community ask that we look at ways to maybe open more of our yards in the afternoons a little earlier or something, especially as it's going to get dark earlier. We've always sort of had that MOU understanding with the city that we open our yards, and I know that it's changed since we've added ELOP, but there's been a lot of conversation about a certain group of students is having this use, and we're now not opening it up for our whole community until it's getting dark. And we totally understand that we want to keep kids safe, but maybe we can brainstorm more solutions. Okay,
I'd be happy to implement whatever is decided.
great. I know that one wasn't really for you, but I was like, I got to tag it on somewhere.
I was at Marin Morning the other day, and the kids climbing on that wall was definitely like the number one thing the kids were loving in that schoolyard. So it's already good and a good use and having a positive impact on kids. So that kind of warmed my heart a little bit. So just wanted to share that.
It's great.
And that was, the PTA helped us to put that in, right? So we appreciate.
Yeah, and then it was installed by our maintenance staff.
Amazing. The teamwork that gets our kids cool stuff.
Makes the dream work.
Just a quick comment to say thank you for the presentation, thank you for everything that you're doing, and thank you for introducing the members of your team. I thought that was really beautiful. I appreciated that. Thank you.
I feel really grateful to have them. It's a great team. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. I think we had 3 updates on the stationary engineer position before, and it was really challenging to fill. Okay, we are now going to open a public hearing and, sorry, I should pause. Is there any public comment on our facilities update? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to adjourn that item. We are now going to open our public hearing in resolution number 2024-2025-3 regarding the sufficiency of instructional materials and textbooks. And you'll introduce it first, and then I'll open the hearing, and then we'll close the hearing. Okay.
Thank you so much. Good evening, Board Trustees, Superintendent Evans, District Leadership Team, Albany educators, and community. Thank you so much for being here. So the purpose of this item is to conduct a public hearing and to adopt a resolution related to sufficiency of our instructional materials and textbooks. The resolution number is 2024-2025-03. And as required by Education Code 60119, we are conducting our annual public hearing to certify that all of our students have the instructional materials as listed on this resolution. And all of our principals have documented and certified that all of our students have the core instructional materials that are listed on this resolution.
Okay, we will now open our public hearing. At this point, if anyone has any public comments on this item, item 2024-2025-03 is open. Okay, seeing no public comment, do you have a board comment? Yep.
I just had a question, actually. So what kind of is the definition of sufficiency? I'm just really curious. Does it mean that there are books? Because I noticed that some of these books are like 30 years old and some are at least a decade or 2 old. So I'm just really curious when we decide that something is not sufficient for students.
Sure. Sufficiency means that all students have the material itself. And core instructional materials are instructional materials that have been officially adopted by the district. And unfortunately, you are right. We are behind in adopting new materials in a lot of ways in subject areas. At the same time, that does not necessarily mean that we are not engaged with up-to-date materials, because we use a lot of supplemental materials. So official adoption takes a lengthy process, review process, about more than a year, and it is a very costly venture to take on. And perhaps that is the biggest reason why some of our adoptions are not as current as they could be. But we are constantly looking to see which subject areas that we do need to be more current with in terms of adoption. But if you take a look at, for instance, the list of novels at the high school, they are pretty current and diverse materials. At the same time, yes, when we take a look at textbooks, again, because of the cost, and I'm in constant conversation with our site leaders about which subject areas will we be looking to adopt next, understanding that we cannot afford to do adoptions in multi-subject areas at once. So for instance, the last adoption we did in the school district was the TCI adoption, K through 5, if you remember social studies. That happened not last school year, but the school year before. So we will be looking to do a new adoption next school year, most likely in literacy, language arts, K through 5, and hopefully another subject area at the high school.
One of the things I do want to say is that as we plan for next year in terms of budgeting, is making sure we set aside some money to be able to do the textbook adoptions, because they are expensive. And we definitely need to do that. I'm not sure if we've been doing that.
Okay. If there are no other questions or comments, we will do a roll call vote on adopting the resolution, which is just saying that we have enough materials for every student to have the materials.
Can we get a motion?
We need a motion, yeah.
I move that we adopt resolution number 2024-25-03.
Second?
Trustee Connor, are you okay? Okay, good. I just want to make sure. All right, so we have to roll call our resolutions, so we're going to do that.
Student trustee Shepard,
Yes.
trustee Khan. We're
No,
rotating.
we're going to rotate our order on all of these. We're going back old school like Zoom.
Sorry, it starts with you tonight, trustee Khan.
Yes.
Trustee Boyd,
Yes.
Vice President Hopwood,
Yes.
President Davidson.
Yes.
And trustee Mahoney.
Yes.
Thanks.
Sorry, I should have prefaced that. Also, we're going back to the rotation so that when we do this, it's not always the same order. Okay. All right, we're going to close our public hearing. Closed. The only time I get to use that thing. Anyway, next time someone else can do it, I'm happy to share. All right, we are going to move on to our review and action items. Our first review and action item is to receive our unaudited actuals financial report.
So let me introduce you to our interim CBO, our Chief Business Officer or official, Chris Thomas, who has been working since June, the end of June, tirelessly in trying to get this budget prepared for us. And so, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for your hard work. And so she's going to present our unaudited actuals. And we also want to come back in October as well to present again. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to her to share her presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Evans, and good evening, board, community, cabinet, staff. Thank you for letting me come here and present to you tonight. It has been a very interesting last couple months. I've really gotten to know Albany Unified School District quite well from a budget perspective. And, you know, as they say, the budget expresses the programs of the district and the priorities in dollars and cents. And so when I look at this budget, I can certainly understand where your priorities are, and it's very clear to me that it's a very student-centered district. So anyway. In your packet that's attached to the agenda, these are the state reports. You'll be happy to know I'm not going to go through them one page at a time. There is a lot of information here, however, that if you have a burning desire, it's got very good information in it. So I'm going to go through a PowerPoint tonight that will kind of share with you some of the highlights. I'm happy to answer questions as I go, so please feel free to stop me. No one can get more caught up and excited about talking about the budget than I can. It's a blessing and a curse, according to my husband. So anyway, with that, we'll go ahead and begin. So unaudited actuals is really the process by which we end up closing our books. And by doing so, we go in and we analyze all of the revenues and all of the expenditures, category by category or program by program. We call them resources. Things like Title I funding or ELOP grants. So we go through and we analyze all of that. And we make sure that we're recognizing the appropriate levels of revenues and the appropriate expenditures. It must be completed each year by September 15th, approved by the Board of Education or Board of Trustees. And then we have to submit it, we now in these 21st century, we upload it to the County Office of Education, who does their own review process before they send it off to the state. Once we've completed that process, and actually we've already started working with our audit firm, our independent audit firm, who will come in and audit the work that we've done in order to support whether or not we've done a good job recognizing those revenues and expenditures. And so that process has begun. That's an independent audit. It's due to the state by December 15th unless there's an extension requested and approved. And then we would typically bring it back to the board in January. What is the impact on 24-25? It's interesting because I've been living in two different fiscal years. I've been pretty much focused on 23-24, but everything we do for 23-24 then has an impact on 24-25. And so when we close, we basically are updating what our projected ending fund balance is for 23-24, and that becomes our beginning fund balance for 24-25. It does not change the budget that you approved or adopted back in June. So the revenues and expenditures that you approved do not change, but that beginning fund balance does change, and therefore the ending fund balance, which is really your savings account or your reserves, and get updated as well. And that has implications for things like multi-year projections. So we also go through the general ledger, and we are updating all of our other funds, of which you have about 10. And then we update all of our assets and our liabilities, assets being things like cash or receivables, and liabilities being things like payables or other types of liabilities like deferred revenue. Now, typically, and I was sharing with Dr. Evans, we would bring back a budget revision usually around the month of October to kind of say, okay, we've closed, we've rolled our carryover, we've updated our beginning balances, and now we want to present to the board, this is how that impact on 24-25 looks. And so we would propose doing that in October. And part of what we're doing is we're taking those carryover dollars. So let's take ELOP. That seems to be a big program and a popular program. We're going to take the carryover, the expenditures that we did not spend, and we're going to post that then to this year's budget. So we're going to say, okay, if we're getting roughly $1 million for ELOP and we have $200,000 in carryover, we're going to then budget that carryover in this year's budget, and that way program people have access to that amount of money. That goes across all of our categoricals that have carryover or deferred revenue. So some of the highlights in 23-24 that we looked at was calculating our biggest revenue, which is the LCFF, the Local Control Funding Formula. And we look at our enrollment and we look at our ADA. And ADA is now calculated 2 or 3 different ways. We look at current year ADA, which is P2, period 2. We look at prior year ADA, and we look at the 3-year average, and we say, what's biggest? Where do we get the most amount of money? For us, it was actually current year ADA. So our P2 ADA, because our enrollment was actually up, and I'm giving you some of the numbers in the slides, In 22-23, you had 3,529 students, and in 23-24, you had 3,574. So because you actually were growing, or we were growing in Albany, we were able to use our current year P2 ADA. And I'm giving you the amounts here, kind of what that ADA looks like. P2 was 3,428 and some change, and the three-year average was 3,418. So you can see, we look at it and we say, which is the biggest number? We also want to note as a highlight that the majority of our COVID funds are now gone. They were gone for the most part in 22-23. There was some residual left. Arts, music, instructional materials, discretionary block grant. There was still $2.2 million roughly left for that. That's been also closed out. So all of those years of one-time money have come to an end, for the most part. There's still a little bit of learning recovery left, but not a lot. And then I talk about that art, music, instructional materials, discretionary block grant. And that final $2,180,000 is important because when we look at the impact that that money has on our budget, it's pretty significant. So I wanted to highlight that in particular. It's also important to note that that arts, music, instructional materials, discretionary block grant is one time in nature. So when we get a bump from that, it's a bump one time. It's not ongoing like ELOP. We get an amount of money every single year. That was a one-time grant that we got one time, we spend it, and it's gone. Some more highlights, learning recovery. I spoke about that just briefly. And in another slide or two, we're going to go through what's different between 23-24 and 24-25, because there's some significant differences. Typically, when we're closing, we have Title I every year, we have Title II every year, we have these programs every single year, but because of the residual impact of COVID, we had all these big one-time grants that we've been spending down since 2020-21, and because 23-24 was really one of the last years of that, we're going to see some big variances between last year's budget that we closed and this year's budget. So learning recovery is one of those. It was a significant grant. We had 6 years to spend it. Had to be fully spent by 2028, and we have about 62,000 left. That's important because if you look at 23-24, that was funding about $890,000 worth of expenditures last year. This year, it's going to be 62,000 and some change. ELOP on the other side is ongoing. So we're getting about $942,000 a year. We have about $1.2 million in carryover, primarily because the first year we got ELOP, nobody knew how to spend it, and you had to build a program. So most districts, it took them a year to get it going. And so it's pretty typical that districts are still spending down a year in arrears, if you will. The key here is that we're only allowed to carry over 23-24 revenue. We still have a little bit of money from 21-22, but we're spending that down this summer. So we're hopeful that the majority of that will get spent down. And then we have our new Prop 28. So Prop 28, not to be confused with the art, music, instructional materials, discretionary block grant, is the arts and music program. That is an ongoing program in Prop 28. And so that's about $473,000. When we closed, we noted that we didn't spend any of that money last year. And again, that's really typical of most districts because they didn't even release the allocations of how much districts were going to get until late winter, early spring. That's way too little time for districts to try to pull together and staff or to make decisions about, oh, if we're going to get this amount of money, how are we going to effectively operate a program? So we find ourselves in the fortunate situation where we have our current year 24-25, and we're going to have carryover, which allows us to kind of do some other planning. So you have paper copies because numbers can be very hard to see on the big screen. I tried to make the numbers as big as possible, but this is really a summary of the general fund. And we break it unrestricted, which is where the board has the most amount of discretion for how we spend our money. The restricted is where we're getting lots of revenues like ELOP that come with strings attached. And so while we may have discretion to develop programs with our stakeholders, we don't have a lot of discretion on how we spend the money. And then the combined general fund. And you can see the combined total expenditures, $63,572,000. if someone asks you what's your total general fund budget, that's your total general fund budget. So they always were referring to what is your total expenditures for a budget. And you can see that fourth or fifth number down below in the combined, you can see a negative $605,000. That's where our expenditures exceeded our revenues by $605,000. Now that's the combined budget. Generally, when we talk about deficit spending, which is where we're spending more than we're bringing in, we look at the unrestricted budget because, again, that's where we have the most amount of flexibility and discretion on how we spend our money. And it's really typical in the restricted to have deficit spending because we're spending down prior year carryover, and those are usually with one-time expenditures. So in this particular instance, you can see that unrestricted, we had revenues that exceeded our expenditures by $2 million. Seems like a very high amount. That was what my initial impression was. However, when you think about that instructional materials discretionary, art, music, instructional materials discretionary block grant, $2.2 million that we brought into the general fund to cover all the decisions that were made last year, that's really what's making up the majority of that, and I'll show you that in a moment. So then we have the beginning fund balance, and we have our ending fund balance. Go ahead, next slide. So here's the trend over the past 5 or 6 years. So you can see dating back to 2016-17. And we're focusing just on the unrestricted part of the budget, because again, that restricted is the ones with strings attached. And you can see our trends show that we have deficit spending each year when we close, with the exception of 2 years, 2021. And 2021 was our pandemic year. That was the full year we were in a pandemic. That's when we received a ton of money from the state and the federal government. Many districts closed their books with a lot more money. We also had this significant, most of us were in distance learning, if not all of us. And so our costs were really lower because we weren't ordering all those instructional materials and supplies that we need in the classroom because kids were at home learning. So generally speaking, I can tell you most districts saw this type of trend in 2021. 22-23, you can see the level of deficit spending. I'm not sure exactly what was happening that year. My guess is that there was something unique or unusual one time in nature that created at least part of it. And then you can see 23-24. Go ahead, Kim. But what I wanted to do is just kind of highlight and add in 24-25, because 24-25 is now the year in which we're living. And I wanted you to see how that trend actually continues of deficit spending in the unrestricted, which is somewhat concerning. So when you see the $2,090,000, which is in the 23-24, if we backed out that 2,180, that $2,180,905, we would have shown a deficit there of $91,000. So when we're comparing ongoing revenues with ongoing expenditures, that's what we would be looking at. You would be backing out those one-time big revenue infusion from that art, music, instructional materials discretionary block grant, and we would see what the true deficit spending was, which is about $91,000. And that's why you're then seeing in 24-25 a much more significant deficit, because in 23-24 we had a huge COLA. 24-25, 1.07%. Very, very small COLA when you consider the level of inflation and cost increases that we're seeing. So now I wanted to show kind of also what that impact is on the beginning fund balance. So I've added in here second interim. So second interim is the first column, 23-24. That's how our unrestricted budget looked. We had net increase, decrease of about $380,000. In June, when staff brought to you their adopted budget, it showed your projected totals for 23-24 and your adopted budget. This is how it looked at that time. There was a net increase of about $1.4 million. And then when we closed, it was up about $680,000. And I will tell you, I looked at that to say why. Because as I've shared with Dr. Evans, my concern is, did I do something wrong? So I want to be able to validate the variances that I'm seeing. And what we saw is that fourth quarter lottery, for example, non-Prop 20, the unrestricted lottery, was up. So we never know what our lottery revenue is going to be. We get a notice in July that tells us from the state, you can use this estimate, this amount for the last quarter. Lottery sales were strong, and therefore the last quarter estimates were significantly higher, to the tune of about, I think about $160,000. So a big part of the swing was lottery revenue. We also looked at interest earnings, although that's part of that increase from 380 to 1.4. Our interest earnings, even with an increase that was happening in the spring, still came in like $10,000 more. So when we look at some of the variances, we were able to validate those, that they were real in nature, because that was, of course, my concern. But then you look at 24-25, and you see that big deficit, that $1,134,000. That increase from 23-24 doesn't change that deficit. We're still in deficit spending in the adopted budget. What it does do is it increases your reserves or your savings account. So you can see in the adopted budget, we were assuming in that third column, that bottom 5.360, that was going to be our beginning fund balance for this year. Now it's $6,047,000. Why is that important? Because I actually looked at your multi-year projections that were presented to you in the adopted budget. And I know there's been a lot of conversation about the need to consider budget reductions. And part of the reality of that is when those multi-year projections were completed, it showed deficit, sorry, the font is very small, so I'm gonna put my glasses on. In 25-26, there was ongoing deficit of about $883,000. And in 26-27, over $1.2 million. So what that did in 26-27 is it reduced that savings account, your reserves, down to just under $60,000 over your required 3%. So when we look at 26-27, meet your 3% reserve requirement plus 70,000, which is very tight. What this closing does is it makes that, if everything else stays the same, nothing else changed, which we know is not the case, but if we're looking at apples to apples, you would now have $700,000, not 69, because that savings account has been boosted by almost $700,000, which then carries forward. Does that make sense? So what is different between 23-24 and 24-25? Again, I was looking at $2 million revenues over expense, 1.1 million, almost 1.2 million deficit spending. Why did that big swing happen? So we know in 23-24, we had growth about, from what it was in 22-23 to 3,574 students. We know we had a big COLA, 8.22%. We had that one-time transfer we just talked about, 2.1, really almost $2.2 million. And we had a UPK grant of about $176,000, about $145,000 of which was funding some of our TK teachers. That was one time. We spent $131,000 of that. So then we go to 24-25. In the adopted budget, we were projecting a decline from 3574 to 3550. And the multi-year projections showed a decline of an additional 62 in 25-26 and 63 in 26-27. That's in part what's driving those deficits in those out years. The COLA was 1.07. That took all of us by surprise in January. We were seeing in December big COLAs of almost 3%. So that huge reduction of 2% is a lot of money. We lost that one time in art, music, instructional materials, discretionary block grant. The UPK, we now only have 45 to help offset the cost of those teachers. Salary increases of 3% versus a 1% COLA. If we had a 3% COLA and a 3% salary, that would have helped to fund it. We have just the normal operating costs that we're going to have every year, things like step and column, things like inflation, property and liability insurance going up, utilities going up, all of those things that are driven really outside of our control. And that's in part what's driving that deficit spending of $1.1 million. In addition, in 23-24, we had some COLA on some and no COLA on others. But we were able to generally operate within our categorical budget. So CTIG was an example. Even though we didn't have any COLA, our expenditures were within our budget. We got COLA on special education, for example. But in 24-25, with zero to little COLA, our costs are going up much higher, faster, and therefore we're now starting to make contributions to some of those categorical programs that we weren't in the past. So this, and again, these numbers are super small, but this kind of gives you an idea of how we're spending our money. We're saying these are expenditures by object. Object is certificated salaries versus classified versus employee benefits, et cetera. So you can kind of see how that pans out. There's no surprise that certificated, classified, and health and welfare benefits and other benefits are the majority of our budget. And then we have materials and supplies. We have other operating expenditures, and that includes things like the audit reports that we do. Anything that's a contract, we have there. And then we have a little bit of capital outlay or other. Then we look at it by function, and function is simply, what is the function of that expenditure in the organization? My function is typically fiscal services. Dr. Evans' function would be the superintendent function. Your function is the board. Teacher's function would be instructional. And then we have various types, like custodians would be a custodial function. So we break it down by function, major function. Instruction, you can see at 61%, just under 39 million. That's not just teachers, that's instructional aides, instructional supplies, all of it. Instruction related, which would include principals and office staff and our instructional leaders. General administration, which I would be a part of, for example, or Marina would be a part of. Pupil services, which would be things like counselors, school counselors. Plant services, which is your maintenance and your operations, and then ancillary and community services. We did have some general fund contributions. I just broke it down here, special education versus routine restricted maintenance, which is required. Once districts accepted state modernization money back under Prop 1A, which was back in the early 21st century, we all committed to putting 3% of our budgets aside for maintaining those facilities that the state came and helped us fund. Transportation, and of course supplemental LCFF funding that we're obligated, because it's generating money, therefore we have to set money aside for those expenditures. And then I'm just doing a quick history enrollment based on CBED's data, which is that first Tuesday every October, and you can see back in 2011-12 through 15-16, we were at 3,800 or more students. And then we started dropping in 16-17, and you can see where we are at around 3,500 students starting in 2020-21, 2019-20. All of our other funds, we have the Self-Administrative Unit, Fund 10, Child Development Fund, Cafeteria Fund, Deferred Maintenance Fund, Special Reserve other than capital outlay, the Building Fund, which is where we account for our bond proceeds, Capital Facilities Fund, which is developer fees, modernization money from the state, and the County Schools Fund, Facilities Fund. On interest and redemption, that's where the community is helping us pay back all those bonds, so we account for it there. And then the Special Reserve for capital outlay, Fund 40, which I believe is new. What are our next steps? So, upon approval tonight, we'll be forwarding this to the Albany County Office of Education. We'll be forwarding a copy to our auditors. We'll work and have already begun working with our independent audit firm, Christie White. We're currently in the process, Marina and I have already begun looking at reconciling position control to the budget. So we're now moving into 24-25 and really saying, okay, we've got our staffing done for the day. How does that compare with what we budgeted? And we're going to continue to monitor our enrollment. This is where there's really good news, which is that our enrollment is currently up. So we're hovering at about 3692. That's 142 more than was in the adopted budget. So that's really where we need to get in, recalculate our LCFF based on new attendance estimates. And we're just going to continue to review all of those categories. If we close the books for utilities, how does that compare, those final utility costs, to this year's budget? So we look at all of that stuff that we used to close, and we look at this year's budget, and we say, do we need to make modifications based on what we learned through the closing process? Updating all those categorical budgets for carryover, scheduling a budget advisory committee. I'm not sure where we are with that. That's normally what I'd be doing. Bring an updated budget revision to the board in October, which will help you all have a better idea where do we stand, especially with all this growth, and then communicate with community stakeholders and partners, things like ATA, et cetera. I know I've gone very quickly through a lot. Takes a moment to absorb, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Okay. I'm sorry for getting so excited about it, but.
It's very exciting. Do you want to start out? Go ahead.
That was great, thank you. I think your excitement has like rubbed off a little bit on us, so that's always a good thing. And thanks so much for all of your work and everything you've been doing to help us out. So I had a quick question. We passed Measure G back in March, and prior to that, we'd worried that we would have to make reductions of 2.8 million, and because it passed, we had to make reductions of 1.9. And we were thinking that moving forward for the next few years, we're looking at $650,000 in reductions every year. Mm-hmm. Where are we with that in terms of reductions? Does this enrollment increase help reduce that reduction threat?
I think that is the question du jour, and that's why we want to bring a budget back to you in October, because yes, to answer your last question, enrollment increases always help, especially since we weren't using the 3-year average. Districts that were using that 3-year average have to really bump up in order for it to have an impact. I've run some brief estimates, and it will definitely help significantly. But we also have to then look at, we added a TK teacher since, because our TK enrollment was up. We added, a 6th grade teacher. Because of the growth we've seen, we've actually added costs as well. And because we get LCFF revenue based on grade span, TK we get one amount because we get the base for TK through 3rd grade, but then we get a TK augmentation to pay for that additional adult in the classroom. 4-6 we get a different amount, 7-8, 9-12. So it all depends on where the growth is, will drive how much additional money we're going to receive. And then we have to look at where do we think our attendance is going to be. Is it going to hover at about where it was last year? Are we projecting growth? But if we have more students, we're going to have more money. How does that compare with the additional costs? Usually we're going to see a benefit. I would expect that. But until I pull it all together and look at it, I can't answer it specifically.
Thank you. Sounds like the jury is still out with that, but that does sound a bit hopeful.
We're very excited about the growth.
Great.
I don't want to understate it too much. We are excited about it, and I do think it's a positive. We just need to see, there's a lot of line items in this budget, so we just want to take our time and go through it and bring you back a thoughtful budget presentation in October so we can feel really solid about our recommendation we might make.
So, again, thank you for your work. I really appreciate it. And I'm, as a new member of the board, this may be a stupid question or one that is already covered. So if it has been, apologize, shame me, whatever it may be, or point me offline, whatever it may be. I got kind of stuck on slide 9, looking at the revenues and expenditures across the board. And as kind of a simpleton, the way I read it was like, look, our revenues are roughly flat. I realized it went up and down a little bit because of some things with the lottery and COLA and that sort of thing. But expenditures jumped significantly. Just like to dimensionalize it for me, the expenditures went up by roughly $3 million. Just to dimensionalize it for me, how should I think about like what's driving that cost? I got some of it was coming out of salary increases. Is that driving all of it, or what are the other things I should have in my mind as I think about what's driving that increase in expenditures? And again, apologies if this has been covered in other places.
The category, the line item is expenditures / other. The other is the contribution to restricted programs. Things like that routine restricted maintenance and special education. And other programs that I highlighted like that are now going to require a contribution because they were operating within their budgets last year, but this year, the expenditures are now exceeding revenues. So part of it is our contributions are up. I know when I closed, I identified that we needed to make a greater contribution for routine restricted maintenance to meet that 3%, for example. So part of it is, yes, we gave raises on the natural. 3% is going to create, if salary and benefits are our biggest line item in the budget, if we give a 3% raise, that's a significant amount. In addition to that, we have growth, and so now we've added more teachers and we've added more instructional assistants, like for that TK classroom we added. So we've also added staff, and that's going to create an increase in expenditures. Utility costs and things like that are going to go up, just inflation in general. But we also know a lot more now than we knew last June. So that's why we need to go in and now revalidate those numbers. So if you're new to the board, you know, we're adopting our budget before the state even adopts their budget. And we're having to adopt a budget before we have all our staffing in place. I know that Marina and her staff were like hiring people and making sure that we had all the people. I know Brian, for example, he was hiring people for special ed. So now we have to verify, if we budgeted for a vacant position, did that final staff person that we hired come in higher or lower? So those are all the things that we're doing when we're reconciling position control. So typically, most people, we're gonna estimate a little higher on the placement. Is that person gonna get placed on step 10 or step 2? It's a huge delta between those two. I don't know this contract by heart, but usually most contracts have a maximum teacher placement, for example. And usually we're budgeting it somewhere in there. So yes, the costs look higher. Now we need to validate that, is that still the same?
And again, simple man, not an accountant, but like, so maybe I should think about some of that increase is like we're changing like a contra entry or something like that we have to, it's accounting for some ways other than the budget, and now we have to account for it here. Is that the right way to think about it, or am I?
Say that, ask that one more time.
So what I thought I heard is, so salary, other hirings, yada, yada, yada. And I recognize that there's be some reconciliation of the budget of forecast versus actuals and that sort of thing. The other thing I think I heard, I just want to make sure I understand, is that there are other places in the budget other than the unrestricted fund that we have to fund that are in prior years would not be accounted for or didn't have to be accounted for in this way. And this year they're having more of an impact than they had in prior, significantly more of an impact than in prior years.
Because we had adequate money to support the program.
Yeah.
And now that money is not adequate, because if you're getting zero or little COLA, but your costs are going up a higher rate, then you're going to have to start making a contribution. So that's all the stuff we're taking a look at, because some of that may come down a bit or go up depending on where staffing. So for example, special education has a significant amount of staff. We're looking at things like all of the non-public school placements. You approved a contract today. How does that contract compare with what we were estimating at back in June, which was over 3 months ago? So we're looking at all of that stuff, and we may be able to say, hey, our expenditures are coming in less. We don't know until we're able to actually verify all of that information. And the revenues are just as important too. I mean, for example, I can already tell you lottery revenues compared to, and interest revenues, I'm going to be recommending increasing those revenues in this year's budget based on how we closed. Sure. That's going to be an impact. That could be a significant amount of money. You know, we're not talking $10,000, so we're talking more. So we'll be looking at those revenues and those expenditures. So how do we increase this and decrease that?
Thank you.
So I've been listening to them describe the budget for a number of years, and I still don't understand lots of things. But I'm wondering whether a part of what Josh is talking about, like looking at, for instance, the fiscal year 23-24 versus 24-25, where we had the $2.1 million one-time transfer for the art, music, instructional materials block grant, and then in 24-25 we don't have that anymore. It's not like we cut the money we're spending by the full $2 million that we had before, so I would guess that we used to have a pot of money that allowed us to spend the $2.1 million, so it wasn't our personal expenses, and now we have to actually spend that ourselves, so that would like jack up our expenses because we don't have a pot of money to like take that away. Does that?
I think you have the concept.
Okay.
I do.
Does that make sense? Like, I think it's like we had a pot of money for certain things, and now we don't, but we still have to do those things. So now it has to come out of our hide as opposed to coming from the pot of money we had before.
Well, whenever you have a trend of deficit spending, and again, if you go back to the one slide where I'm showing all of those trends, we have a long-standing deficit spending challenge here. We call it a structural deficit. When you see ongoing, when you're closed, not just a budget deficit, this is actual expenditures for what, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 7 of the 9 years, our expenditures exceeded our revenues. That tells me we have a structural issue, because that's typically not what you see. You typically will close the books and you'll end up with 30,000 to the good, even though maybe you had a budgeted structural deficit. Because what happens is we're budgeting positions, and we might have a classified position, an instructional assistant, a custodian, office clerical support, who leave. They go on for whatever reason, they retire, they go to a different position. We have vacancies is the point. And when we have those vacancies, we've budgeted the full year, but we've only paid them part of the year, so we have a savings. That's typical of what you'll see. You'll see savings. So when I look at this trend, I would be a little bit concerned that there's a structural problem here, especially when you factor in 25, 26, and 26, 27's multi-year projections also showing that structural deficit. Now, to your question, growth, because we were projecting declining enrollment, not only this year, but the 2 out years, we need to take a hard look at our cohort enrollment trends and say, are we flat? Because flat in those out years would make a huge difference than losing 62 or 63 students. That's a significant amount of money. If you figure an average for easy math, 10,000 a student, and you figure 95% attendance, you're talking about 59 students, that's a lot of money. So we want to take a hard look at our current enrollment, where we've ended up, and what we're projecting for those 2 out years, because that's really important information for us to have. Again, when we come back in October, we won't have multi-year projections, but at least we can have enrollment projections for you, not contracting out, but we can do enrollment projections using a cohort method that I've done many years. Because all of that stuff informs those hard decisions that we may have to make. I don't know if that helps explain it or not. And don't feel bad, this is complicated stuff. I've been doing it 27 years, and you know what I mean? So, but it took me a few years to get my head around it fully.
Also, I have been paying close enough attention to hear the word structural deficit a lot.
For like a lot of years. Can I ask a quick question? Is our ACC preschool enrollment included in our overall district enrollment, or is it just TK and above?
It's TK through transition. So that transition ages 18 through 22 program. So it's TK through. We don't receive any ADA for preschool, and so we don't include that in our enrollment numbers.
Okay, and just so in the past, there's like I always envision it, we've got like our unrestricted bucket that we're in charge of, right? The restricted is like, this money has to go here, and we can't do anything about that. But in the unrestricted bucket, we could like move things around, and we've done a lot of like things recently to put money in places that we assumed was being really helpful. And when Melissa and I joined the board, our unrestricted general fund was putting some big chunks of money to supplement ACC and to supplement the aquatic center. Those have, at least for the most part, and what we can see, become like operating within their own budgets.
I can assure you, when I closed both Fund 12, which is ACC, and the Aquatics Fund, they're both operating within, they're generating and self-sufficient. So there is no general fund contribution supporting those 2 programs.
I think it'd be really helpful when we see any of this come back to really know that as well, just because I know that like there was some maintenance that's really needed at the aquatic center, some things like that. So if they're generating revenue that we can start to think forward about being like, okay, that's happening, that would help us in making some decisions too.
Well, and I think in addition to that, so for example, Maureen and I this afternoon, because I'm a little bit of a position control geek, nerd perhaps is a better, are all of our staff being charged? So for example, custodial staff, if there's a custodian cleaning ACC, is that being charged to Fund 12? So those are some of those less obvious costs that we're taking a look at right now. I can tell you closing it, I think it's pretty good. I think there's been a good job, but I do think there's some potential movement that we could make there. So we're actually taking steps to look at that and say, hey, if this is being charged to food service, is it being charged, is this being charged to the food service fund? If there's a custodian cleaning ACC, how many hours are they spending in it, and are all of those hours being charged there? So we're looking at it from that angle as well.
Yeah, because I know we had a whole conversation too about how when our district, like our executive cabinet has to do anything related to ACC or the aquatic center, that we're making sure that we're charging that to those as well. Like I'm sure that's.
I know my staff is very aware of that, and that they are doing that for the most part. I think that there's some fine tuning to do, but I think the administration has done a really good job of making whatever changes were made a few years ago to make sure those costs are being accounted for. So I think it really is down to fine tuning.
So I'm just, as we're looking through this great presentation you gave us on slide 7, which sort of shows 2016, 2017 to 23, 24. We knew we were facing some of these challenges. It's really looking at those 21, 22 school years and now kind of looking forward to 24, 25, where it looks like we're on a similar trend to those years. I guess I think we as a board need to look at what have we done, like within our district, to, like, what decisions have we made to increase that deficit spending, and then what's out there that's just happening. Like, I know that our garbage collection costs, doubled, and we try to do things to offset that. I know that our PG&E is, like, for everybody. I mean, I know at my own business, it went from, it's 3 times higher than it was 5 years ago. And it's, it's enough to make a big impact. So I think it would be really helpful for us to kind of start looking at those things. And then, it is concerning to still see that we could be looking at sort of these challenging budget numbers, even though we made all of these efforts to pass Measure G. And we still made the budget cuts. And my last question is, this number on this one on slide 9, the 1.134 million, we cut enough, we assumed as a board, to like equalize that. Is this after?
This is your adopted budget. So this is based on what you took action on in June for the adopted budget. So my understanding is that there were reductions made, and that those reductions were implemented and included in the budget. Those are some of the things we're going to be validating. Because when you're making those types of reductions, it's complicated. And so we just need to make sure when we're reconciling position control to the budget, did all of those pieces get accounted for? That's part of what we're going to be looking at. And were they accounted for in such a way that we realized an adequate level of savings? But, I would iterate that in June, we were adopting a budget. The staff was bringing to you a budget based on the best information we had at that time. We didn't have a state budget. We didn't know all of our staffing. We didn't know what our enrollment would look like. It was a lot of unknowns. We probably didn't know our property and liability insurance. We may have or may not have known our workers' comp rates. So we're asking you to approve a budget. We're having to make a lot of assumptions for that budget that we then need to validate once we get final numbers. So there can be some shifts and changes between the adopted budget and the first budget revision, and that's what we want to take a hard look at, a deeper dive into it to make sure. We need to validate, is this 1.134 still ring true based on better information that we have now than we had back in June? And so it's hard for me to answer the question because it's been 3 months since you've seen this budget, and a lot has changed in 3 months. So I don't know if that helps or doesn't help, but I think, and this is why I'm recommending, we bring it back a budget revision in October and not wait till first interim. When we're already halfway through the year. You need good information sooner rather than later, because if we validate the 1.1 or say it's higher, then yes, the district probably needs to go into having some big conversations about what does that mean. If we're able to reduce this down, then that will depend on how those conversations may be impacted by that. So that would be our hope. We may not be able to get the entire budget done by then, but we can make enough of a dent in updating the numbers that I think it will give you a much better idea of where you stand based on the information we have now. Because a lot has changed.
So the recommendation is still that we should approve these unaudited actuals right now, this report, and say, sure, it looks like numbers, and then wait to get an update.
Well, what we're asking you to do is approve unaudited actuals and that we have fairly stated our financial position as of June 30th, which we believe we've done. 24-25 is then the next step.
Okay.
That doesn't impact these numbers because this is for last year. We believe that the auditors will support the financial position that we're presenting to you tonight.
Okay.
But this approval with these numbers, we're sending these to the county.
And then ultimately
As well as to the auditors.
And the state.
The state.
Yeah, this is the one, the adopted budget doesn't go to the state, first interim doesn't go to the state, second interim doesn't go to the state. It all goes to the county office. This actually goes to the state. So the county office reviews it, and then they upload it to the state. That's how all that comparative data, because they actually compare with every other district, how did unaudited actuals happen. So this is your final, and this does become immortalized at the state.
Again, new guy with what might be an inappropriate request, and if it is, shame me. Slide 13, I would love, and it kind of goes a little bit to my question about slide 9, but in slide 13, I'd love to see that as a stacked bar chart across multiple years so I can get a sense of where the growth and change in expenditures is coming from. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
So you'd like to see, like, instruction, $38.8 million, how was that the past 3 or 4 or 5 years?
stack bar over the last, exactly.
I don't know that we would be able to have that by October, but certainly that's something we can take a look at.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I think we might have that in one of our budget advisory committee meetings, because I know we looked at it quite a few times.
Yeah, I can go back and look and see what I can dig up too. Yeah, we'll put some effort into to see if we can relieve that load a little bit for you.
I don't really know if this is an appropriate question for this conversation, but I'm curious about the UPK and how it keeps kind of getting expanded and its potential impacts, especially because, like, we're at age 5, but then there's I guess the state wanting to expand it to 4 by 25, 26, and now there's already conversations about expanding it to 3 years of age. So, like, just curious about where that might land us. I don't know.
Yeah, this UPK grant was intended to support the implementation of transitional kinder. We started implementing that. First, it was for the first 3 months, and then it's been expanded. But if they look at expanding it further than what's already in the law, they'd have to give us new money. This would not touch any of that. And literally, it was an implementation grant, and so it was intended to be one time. We used it because, some districts used it to buy new TK play equipment or to redo trike tracks or to add and expand playgrounds for kinder because we were adding more kinder/TK students. Because it doesn't sound like we did that, we used it to support TK staff, which was fine. But then it's going away because it was one time. So we had to move those expenditures back to the general fund.
Does this presentation of unaudited actuals in this scenario put the USD at any risk? Like, are we, just because we are showing this deficit spending for so long, we're still showing like the required reserves 3 years out, et cetera, so we're not in any?
That's an excellent question, and I should have said that. No, we are closing the books with an adequate level of reserves, both for the current year, but even because we're closing with more, it's having a positive impact on those multi-year projections you approved back in June. So really, if the county office reviewed our unaudited actuals and came in and said, we have a concern, they would give us what's called a going concern. So you've probably heard of positive certification, qualified, negative. Well, in unaudited actuals, they wouldn't do that because we're done. It's not a budget, it's finals. But they could give us a going concern. I am not anticipating that. So I think everything is positive. It's information for the board. It's powerful information for you all and for the cabinet to say, okay, where are we now, and what kind of hard decisions might have to make in the future to stay that way. But at this point, you guys are good for this year and the next 2 years, based on June's assumptions. So first interim, we'll have to see.
Helpful. Okay, we'll now take any public comment on the unaudited actuals.
Can you see how riveted everybody is?
Yeah. There's also no one in our virtual audience, so no. I think there's another debate or something going on that people wanted to listen to. I don't know. It's like more, it was important to the other people. Okay. Seeing no public comment, if anyone has a motion.
I move to approve the 2023-24 unaudited actuals financial report.
I second the motion.
Okay, we're going to roll call this one as, we don't need to roll call this one. No. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great, it passes. Thank you so much. That was thorough. Yeah, I'm holding on to this.
I apologize if I was verbose, but, I get excited.
I think we all really like hearing about the money. Sorry. Okay. Much appreciated, and we'll look forward to October.
That's not every board. Not every board gets that excited, so thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right, we are going to move on to, I think this is you again, right? The Resolution 24-25-04, the adoption of annual appropriations. This is the GAN limit.
Yes, another very riveting topic. Back after Prop 13 passed back in the late 70s, when probably most of us were still kids. I know I still was, just FYI. GAN and Jarvis came out and they had all this information about, there needs to be a limit on spending. So they passed what came known to be as the GAN limit. And then there was subsequent legislation that came and basically said, okay, then you just have to adopt a resolution saying we're increasing it. So it kind of nullified the impact of the GAN limit. So today, as part of the closing and unaudited actuals, we do those calculations. We actually used to do them manually. It was like a big algebraic problem. Now the SAC system does the work for us with some adjustments. So we do not need an increase in our GAN limit, so we're coming back with a resolution asking you to establish our new GAN limit for both 23-24 and 24-25 based on the calculations we did. But it literally has no impact.
Okay, any board questions or comments? Any public questions or comments? No? Just gonna make sure I check the two here. All right. Seeing none, we'll take a motion.
I'll move to, got my glasses, pass Resolution 2024-25-04, the adoption of annual appropriations limits, GAN limit.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yep.
Pardon me, we do need a roll call vote for this.
This one's a resolution, isn't it? Yep, okay. I'm like, which one says what? Okay, we're gonna roll call this one in a different order. Be ready.
Yes. Student Trustee Shepherd.
Yes.
Trustee Boyd.
Yes.
Vice President Hopwood.
Yes.
President Davidson.
Yes.
Trustee Mahoney.
Yes.
Trustee Khan.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Same outcome, different order. Great. We are now going to move on to Resolution 24-25-05 in support of Proposition 2, the kindergarten through grade 12 schools and local community college public education facilities modernization, repair, and safety bond act of 2024.
So I'm asking the board to approve this resolution, as the state is actually going out for a bond as well. And so I can't talk about ours, but so this is in support of the bond. So I'm asking the board to approve this resolution.
I'm just going to add that San Diego Unified just faced a huge challenge with their HVAC systems and had like crises in many schools, and Oakland Unified just had a lead issue in a lot of their water fountains. So I feel like this is a great thing for the state to start stepping up on these needs.
I can also add that this is one of the areas of improvement as the board reviewed our own goals and how we are, working on those goals, and state and local policy areas was an area of improvement. So I think this is in line with our need to get engaged in those ways and fully support this.
Okay, any public comment on this? Seeing none, and since this is a resolution, we'll take a motion and a second, and then we'll roll call it. I'll just make it. I move that we approve Resolution 2024-25-05 in support of Proposition 2.
I'll second.
Student Trustee Shepherd,
Yes.
Vice President Hopwood,
Yes.
President Davidson,
Yes.
Trustee Mahoney,
Yes.
Trustee Kahn,
Yes.
Trustee Boyd.
Yes.
Okay, great. Super fun next item. We get to talk about our AUSD district committees and our Board of Education governance handbook. So what this is that we had previously kind of raised the idea, that is not the same one, of we need to talk about our governance handbook, and we are supposed to do this yearly. We've had a lot of changes on our board and a lot of other changes going on, and so it's kind of the thing that we keep pushing off. So my thought was that we say we're going to address the board handbook in our beginning meetings of 2025 so that we have a fully seated board who can review it together, and a board that's going to be together for at least like the next 2 years, and that'll give some time to really do these things. So that's one part. I guess if anyone has any like comments or thoughts on that portion. Everyone feels okay with that? Okay. So the other element of this, I think, is the one that needs a little more discussion, was just talking about sort of our district, our board committees, our district committees. I'm going to pull this up on here. Or Julie, do we have the backup for 13D, or Kim, I guess? Take your time. So I'll just review again quickly. The thought on this one was that, we have a lot of committees, and we have a lot of committees in different sort of states and levels of happening, of Brown Act, like adherence or understanding, different membership makeups. And so just the thought that came up that maybe we need to take a little bit of time, work with our district leaders, et cetera, and really figure out if all of these are committees that the board would still like to have be board-appointed committees or advisory committees. And we have to keep the DLAC, as you can see right there, and we have to keep the Citizens Bond Oversight Committee because we have bonds that they are overseeing. I think there's been conversation that, board policy in other districts is often done with like 2 board members and the superintendent, and then they bring it to the board rather than a whole committee and like all the different things, since they're board policies, and then the community can have input when they're presented in the public meetings or workshops. Budget Advisory Committee has been on pause for a little while, just because we felt like we needed to just raise money instead, which we've been moving forward on. Environmental Action Plan Committee has had the plan approved and is in the steps of executing it. So, does that need to shift focus? Is there anything different? Special Education Advisory Committee is an advisory committee. Is that how we want to continue that? Is there a way we want to get different people involved? Is there anything else that we want to do around that? And then, let's see, we have the Student Achievement Committee. Let's see, we didn't even get it on here. We have a fundraising committee as well, which hasn't met in years. And the idea of that was that we have sort of like some idea of how we're raising money in the community and where it's happening at which sites and kind of where it's going so that at least we have an understanding. Student Achievement Committee and the Wellness Committee, you know, just what are the goals? Are those things that we still put resources into or shift, anything like that? So those are just kind of the questions that I thought maybe we could spend a little bit of time researching, asking, talking about, and then in January sort of have a plan for how these are all going to move forward rather than just kind of continuing to like run meetings. Yeah. Yeah.
So I can comment in part because I had lots to say about the last time that that this came up, and so in the interim, it was helpful for me to understand the difference between board-appointed committees versus not, how this works in other districts, largely the concept of board members running committees if they're board-appointed committees versus our cabinet members running committees, as has largely been happening. And so I definitely understand the need to really look at each of these and how they function, what are quorum requirements, do meetings even move forward if there's only kind of, you know, 2 board members and a cabinet member in the meeting, which I'm pretty sure has happened before. So, you know, those those types of things. Thank you, Dr. Biggs. And so yeah, I just, I do understand the importance of this. I will just say, while I'm saying things, that the concern that I had, which is still something that is important to me, is I really appreciate the way that the committees allow community members, you know, caregivers, et cetera, students, to be able to speak directly on these issues, speak directly to cabinet members, sometimes, you know, maybe the superintendent's in the meeting or, you know, other members of the cabinet. And so I just want to say, I think that that's a really important function that the committees serve. And certainly from my perspective, the decision, if that's the decision that's made to take some time to kind of look at intentionally how this is organized, is not because the role of those committees to kind of open up what's happening at a policy level and bring community members in. It's not because that is not an important function. It's just to make sure that we're more sort of intentional and organized about how that's happening.
I would fully agree that that's sort of the purpose of this, is to just be more intentional about it. Yeah. Okay, if there's any other board comments? She has a great way of putting it all very succinctly. Don't know what we'll do when she's not here. With you, be together, raise our hands. Okay. Any public comment?
More than a comment, it is a question, really. So everyone is super busy. The district is looking for a new permanent superintendent. There are board elections. We're going to try to find a way to get Melissa Boyd to stay involved, even not as a board member. And in the middle of all that business, how is that piece going to happen between now and January? How is the board going to ensure that that thoughtfulness, that intentionality is going to come to fruition, so that once the board meets again in January, the advisory committees and the other committees start again, and with that renewed focus? That's my question.
Well, I'm willing to take that on and be in the role of that, since I'm the one who brought this forward. But I really just want to make sure that we are using everybody's time to the most effective ends. And so I'm going to make sure that between now and the beginning of December, we get this plan laid out and really thought out, and so that when it's ready to be brought back in January, for the committees to resume and things to happen again, and us to put board members to choose our committees, and then for us to find community members for those committees, we really have a plan for each one, and we're really thoughtful. Yeah.
Oh, I can also just add that given that the way we have currently ran all of our meetings have not actually been aligned with Brown Act, they're supposed, like board-appointed committees should have been ran by one of us, not our executive cabinet, as they have been. And so in order to make sure we're doing it right and doing it intentionally and in the way that it's supposed to help all of us, we need to look back at like, okay, this is what we were doing, this is where how we're supposed to be doing it, how do we make sure we're aligned with that, but then also prioritizing our students' needs. I know in the last meeting, I had a lot to say, especially about the Special Education Committee and some of the other committees that are very important to me, but part of that is also looking at what can be an advisory committee or what can be a board appointed, because when we make certain committees board appointed, it has very strict rules. One of the best things about the Special Education Committee was that it was an advisory committee which allowed us to meet virtually, which I think for a lot of us parents with children with disabilities is an important factor in us being able to be present. And if we were to suddenly say we want that to be a board appointed, as much as I want that, that would restrict a lot of parents. And so we have to really think this kind of stuff through and really make sure that in our effort to maintain what is important to us, we're not excluding people, especially those that are most impacted and need to be at the table. So that's kind of some of the things that myself and others have brought up in, agenda planning and other spaces. And so it's going to take time for us to figure out some of these new things that we're learning. And I just ask that you guys be patient with us and also reach out and share some of the things that are coming up for you so we can make sure that we're including parent and community voices as we think about what is important for us and how we can more effectively support our students, but also make sure that we are maximizing our executive board's time, our time, everybody's time, so that, yeah. Sorry, I'm sick, so I'm mumbling, but.
I think those are really, really helpful point to bring up, is that we do have these like very strict parameters that we operate in here. And we found, this was a shift recently that we found out about, that all board appointed committees had to follow the Brown Act, which meant that then all of our executive cabinet had to be trained in how to run Brown Act meetings. And it also eliminated the ability to have any virtual meetings, because you can't, the Brown Act no longer allows for that now that the COVID restrictions have been lifted. So, what? Oh, and the quorum, so how we design our committees basically determines the quorum required. And so if we don't meet a quorum, we can't hold a meeting. And we were finding in so many instances that we were not meeting our quorums, and we were really not able to hold them. So that's really, I think, what we're looking at is how to adjust and shift. Okay. Yeah.
I guess the question is a good question, and it's kind of a thing that was rolling around in my mind also. I'm wondering if it makes sense to agendize some sort of an update or something a couple months from now. I'm just not sure how we imagine we go from our current state of kind of, I don't know, to January, where we're okay, this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do,
I do think we need another board discussion about it, but what I would ask is if it would be okay to, now that we're okay, this is fine, then say, okay, look, this is the committee we're focusing at this week. So what I'll do is I'll lay out kind of I'm going to focus on this committee for this week, and I'm going to reach out to whoever was on that committee. It'll be one board member probably, so don't be offended, and just kind of get some feedback, and I'll probably try and reach out to a community member or two in our executive cabinet staff. And then if anyone's hey, look, I was on this committee, I'm really willing to do kind of the feedback on it and just take point on that, that's great, but I don't want to add people's time, so I'm more than happy to do this. And it feels really important to me to kind of make these as effective as possible. I don't know why, but I want to support that. And so I think maybe I'll look at that and kind of map that out. And then why don't I say I'll give an update to that at our first October meeting, sort of how that's laying out and looking. Does that sound fair? And then from there, we can say, hey, look, we're going to look here and here. Yeah?
And you're going to do that as you run a re-election campaign?
You will not believe how many things I can do in my time, but I'm not allowed to talk about that in here while I'm in board time. But I can show you my daily schedules of things. It'll be fine. That full? Okay. All right. So what you'll expect is basically a timeline of committee reviews by the October meeting. Yeah?
Also, if you want to do that by yourself, cool, but I'm happy to help if you would like.
That's why I said if anyone wants to jump in and is like, hey, I like these committees, I'll do those things.
I was on 3 of the committees.
Okay, great. So I'm going to be talking to you a lot.
Okay, good.
We'll basically go. So October meeting, we're going to have a timeline of committee reviews. Okay? Great. And this is how we make good things happen, is when we all work together. All right. I'm just going to put it out there, too. I really want that fundraising committee to come back, so I want us to make room for that.
Also, I'll just add real quick, we did discuss this in our agenda setting meeting. We like, when we talked about putting this back on the agenda, we were like, okay, we need to actually come up with a plan so people know what happened, and it's not just like, okay, January, we were gonna keep this, and we're gonna scratch that, There was no plan to like just do this out of the blue, and we did have discussion on how we were gonna make sure we're doing it in an equitable way, so yeah.
Okay, so basically at this point, we can take a motion to approve this. I mean, I guess we don't need to say like pausing this reworking of district committees.
I move to approve the pausing of the district committees and updates to the governance handbook until January 2025.
I'll second.
Okay, and we can just all vote. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, great. We are going to do our superintendent and board member reports.
So I just have one thing to report. I had the opportunity to attend the Albany Education Foundation last night, and I just want to thank the Albany Education Foundation for putting on our new teacher event. We have so many organizations that support us, but I just want to highlight them for the work that they've done and continue to do to support our teachers, our schools, and just our community. And so thank you so much, Albany Education Foundation.
I had the pleasure of attending a short recognition ceremony last Friday on the front steps of the high school for Sean Voorhees. I don't know, is that how you pronounce his last name? Voorhees or Voorhees? Along with Dr. Biggs, Dr. Shin, and Dr. Trutain. He is a state champion Paralympic swimmer, and he was there with his family and the swim team, and that was a really nice celebration of his amazing achievements. And then tomorrow, also at the high school, the PTSA first meeting is in the library from 6 till 7, right before back to school night. So that 7 till 9 starts in the high school gym. And then next Thursday, the Site Council and Instructional Improvement Committee kickoff is at 6 o'clock in the library. And then the following day, Friday, it's a busy week or so at the high school. Next week at 1 o'clock on Friday, on the front steps again, will be Profe Pam Lynn McAllister's check presentation ceremony. So I'm sure everyone was following that she was nominated and won the NBC Bay Area Teacher of the Year Award. With a $30,000 prize that goes to the high school. So amazing for her. I had the pleasure of having all 3 of my kids taught by Profe, so big fan. So she will be there next Friday with a check being presented by Provident Credit Union. The NBC will be there to film it, and they're going to be showing that on the Giants Jumbotron at one of their pregame features. And that is everything for me. Thank you. Oh, so I'm ready to say, anybody who wants to come to that, please do come. It'd be fun to celebrate Profe.
No report from me.
The Ocean View PTA meeting is this Thursday from 6:30 p.m. to 3:30. From 6:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m. at the Ocean View Library. There will be pizza and childcare. Please come. We're planning our fall festival, which will take place October 19th this year, and we need all hands on deck. We also have a library fundraiser with Zachary Pizza on Thursday, September 19th. So if you plan to go there, just mention Ocean View Library, and it will, they will be donating a portion of their sales to our lovely library. That's all.
I'm sorry. I will amplify one thing. I've seen emails to the middle school community from PTSA and from Principal Mapes, and so I just want to highlight and kind of amplify. We are getting close to the goal for the PTA membership, but we're still not there yet, so encourage any AMS community folks who have not joined the PTA yet to please do that. And there's also a lovely list of all different ways that community members can get involved in fundraising efforts and different items. So if you're an AMS caregiver person, you probably have received the list, so take a look at that if there's a way that you can pitch in. I know people would really appreciate the extra hands.
I forgot to add, our librarian is looking for volunteers, so if you'd like to volunteer during any of the available time slots, please sign up, and yeah.
I had the pleasure, as I stated earlier, of going to Marin Morning last week. It was kind of a deja vu moment for me. Both my kids went to Marin, but it's like a whole new school, but the same family vibes. So special thanks to Principal Full for inviting me and really the whole community. It's always a great thing to see. Shout out that on September 12th, first PTA meeting for Marin is this Thursday, so be there. And then on the 27th, family movie night, always a good time, September 27th.
Awesome. All right. Cornell is hosting their PTA ice cream social hour on the 20th from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. in the multipurpose room. They are also having their Popsicle Wednesdays, which is a PTA fundraising event sponsored by and put on by the PTA. They are also holding their One campaign, which is a One Give campaign. So they're suggesting, a base donation per student. Please give what you can, and then they won't ask again, is what they say. But we will keep asking because it's for the kids. The PTA is looking for a board secretary and a financial secretary. So if you're interested and you love money as much as we do, this is a position for you. Finally, the Albany Unified School District Celebration Latina is happening at Albany Middle School on Sunday the 15th from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. And we'd like to appreciate Familias Latinas for all that they do in Albany Unified, and particularly for the event that they're putting on during this recognized month. And with that, we are going to move on to our future agenda items. Who wants to add things?
Just from a comment that was made before, I'm not sure if it was written down, but an update on UDL MTSS implementation.
Right. Okay. I think we've talked about all the other things and we're moving them forward. So with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.